Have you ever wondered, is there really a King James behind the King James Bible? My guest today will reveal in his book called Majesty that there really is a king, his life, his wife, his religion. It's all talked about in Majesty, the king behind the King James Bible, today on Babbie's House.
Babbie's house, Babbie's house. Every day is filled with possibility. At Babbie's house, Babbie's house. Everybody is family. Welcome to Babbie's house.
Hello, and welcome to Babbie's House. I'm so glad that you've joined me. You know, being a preacher's daughter, the first Bible that I ever read, the first version was the King James version. I read it, I memorized it, and still to this day, it's really the version that I commit to memory. And my friend David Teems has a love for the King James Bible as well, and he's written about it in his book called Majesty, and he gives us an inside look on King James, the king who had this beautiful literature, this beautiful truth, God's word, translated into the King's English. And you'll meet David Teems today, and we'll talk about this beautiful book, the Bible, as well as his book called Majesty, today on Babbie's House. But right now, I want to sing a song for you and remind you just how much that the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, Jesus, loves you. Sometimes you rise, and sometimes you fall. Sometimes you wonder if you'll make it at all. But when you are weakest, that's when I am strong. So here's a promise you can rest on. I love you, I love you, I love you, I do. I love you through the darkest of nights and in the daytime too, just as roses are red and the violets are blue. Never doubt for one moment that my love is true. But should you need to be reminded of how I feel about you, I'll tell you again, I love you, I do. I'll tell you again, I love you, I do. I placed every star, the sun and the moon, and I painted each sunset with its colorful hue. I created the blue sky and the waves on the seas, but you are my masterpiece. I love you, I love you, I love you, I do. I love you through the darkest of nights and in the daytime too, just as roses are red and the violets are blue. Never doubt for one moment that my love is true. But should you need to be reminded of how I feel about you, I'll tell you again, I love you, I do. I'll tell you again, I love you, I do. I love you from the crown of your head to the sole of your feet. And I did before I knit you together. I love you from high on a hill
you. No, don't ever doubt. Should you need to be reminded of how I feel, I'll tell you again, over and over again, and I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you. Tell you again, never forget that I love you. Yes, I do. I love you. I do. I love you. I do.
We live in an age of instant communication.
An age of the right now.
But is your right now more important than your tomorrow?
When you're on the road, drive.
This video was submitted by a student through the Safety Scholars Program. For more information on teen safety, visit driversedge.org.
A tragedy it is to see you lost in your addiction. Reminds me of a story that someone told me. It's funny how life has this way of turning things around.
This is a banana. This is a cat. This is fire. This is harmless and actually helpful to some people. Don't believe everything you hear. The fact is that every major health organization rejects smoked marijuana. Now that the smoke is cleared, discover truecompassion.org.
And welcome back to Babbie's house. I want to introduce somebody very special to me. David Teems and I go back a few years here in the Atlanta, Georgia area. I met David when he was a young songwriter and musician and writing some of the finest songs that I have ever heard. But what I love most about David is his passion, his deep passion for the Word of God and for literature and for writing and for his voice of expressing what he feels and what most of us want to say and don't know how to say it. And he has written a great book called Majesty, the King Behind the King James Version. And it's a beautiful biography of the King behind the King James Version, the Bible that we have had, that I remember as a child memorizing and reading and my daddy preaching from. And I know many of you probably have a connection like that with the King James Bible. And so I want to introduce you to David Teems. Welcome to Babbie's house, my friend. It's good to have you back.
Thanks for that introduction. That's
Absolutely, my friend.
Thank you.
I remember when you came to my 8th grade class.
I had a feeling you were going to bring that up.
Well, I have to, man, because that's a connection. But you've always had this passion for beautiful words and this just a holy way of expressing.
I think I do. It's kind of a
you do.
zealotry with me.
Let me just affirm you in that. It resonates on the page. God's given you a beautiful voice and a beautiful language style in which to express your heart.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do.
And you've written a book, David, and congratulations on this, because this is quite an accomplishment, and I know something that you've been wanting to do for a while. And this book is called Majesty, the King Behind the King James Bible. What is it about King James that you love so much that you'd want to write about him?
Oh, where do you start? He's such a colorful character. I think, and I discovered him through my love of Shakespeare, of all things. Rediscovered as an adult, went back to Shakespeare and started reading about the age, and all of a sudden, over in the periphery was this odd figure, little slightly bent. He kind of waddled when he walked. His tongue was too big for his mouth, so he had a hard time. You had a hard time understanding him at times. He would dribble when he drank sometimes. And I began to seek that character out, and it happened to be King James. Came to the English throne in 1603 when Shakespeare was at his peak, and so then I started shifting my attention to him, and the more I learned about him, the more fascinating he became. He's got so many contrasts. One writer said that it's not enough to salute James as an original. He was the most complicated neurotic to ever sit on the English throne, and this is the figure, the odd figure behind the King James Bible. Without him, we would have no King James Bible. I think some people have the notion that the Bible was made and we just gave a nod to the reigning monarch. Hey, okay, he's king, so let's call it the King James Bible. But true enough, he, not single-handedly, but he kind of became a true king on that translation. He was probably never more of a king than he was during the translation. So it's just a fascinating story, and the more I read about it, it was just I was enchanted.
Well, I want to talk a lot more about him because his life is fascinating. I want to kind of look a little closer into what it was about him that would make him want to translate the Bible into the king's language. What was his fascination with the Bible and his connection with the Bible that would merit him this translation that has stood the test of time for years?
That's, well, his love of Scripture goes back to his childhood. James was orphaned at 11 months old. He became king of Scotland at 13 months old. He could speak Latin and Greek by the time he was 5 years old. Matter of fact, one of his teachers, when James was probably maybe 7 or 8 years old, one of his teachers would say, if he had a friend over, they would say, choose, he would say to his friend, just choose any chapter of the Bible and watch what this young man can do. And so they would, maybe a chapter out of Philippians or something like that. And so James would translate, as a child, would translate the Bible from the Latin Vulgate into French and then into English. This is as a grade school kid. So he had that kind of intellect, and the Bible was quoted or being quoted during every meal, and so it was kind of a part of everyone's life. But as he became, I'll shift forward into time. By the time he became the English king, and this is one of the points that I always try to make. I've done a lot of radio and TV lately, so I'm in this spew mode where it's just speed talking a lot of times. But I do want to make this point.
Tell us.
So you've gotten right to the right question. James believed in divine right of kings, and that he was appointed, and that wasn't original with him. A lot of kings back in those days felt that way, kings and queens, that God had appointed them. They were above the law. James even wrote books about that. He was the first English monarch to be published when he came to the throne. And so when he came to the throne of England in 1603 when Elizabeth died, he put together 3 conferences. One was to end a 20-year war with Spain that he felt was wasteful. 2 was to unite the realms of England and Scotland. And Parliament said, no, we're not going to do that. They hated Scotland. And so what does James do? He proclaims himself King of Great Britain anyway. If you see a picture of James back in those days, it'll say, Jacobus Rex Magni Britanniae. Johnii, which means King James, or James, King of Great Britain. But it wasn't for 100 years that it was actually called Great Britain, and the two kingdoms came together. But that's the way he did things, kind of a Peter Pan-ish kind of thing, the way he heard it in his head. But the third conference that he did right in the beginning was to settle some of the issues in the Anglican Church. And because the bishops weren't sure where he was coming from, being from Scotland, was he a Protestant, was he Presbyterian, was he Roman Catholic like his mother had been? And so they wanted a conference, and some of the Puritans, that's the extreme right in the Anglican Church, they were concerned too about some issues, and so they had a conference. And it was at this conference that James basically sat all of the bishops down. There were 20 bishops that came, and with their concerns, and James let them know that he really appreciated the Anglican Church, and the reason he was drawn to it so much was that a monarch sat at its table. The Anglican Church knew how to treat a monarch, and back in those days, people did. They understood how to approach majesty, how to speak to it, how to humble yourself in majesty, how not to look in the king's eyes. And here, 400 years later, posterity, we have kind of drifted away from that, dramatically.
I'd say.
But here's the thing that he brought. The second day of the conference, the first day, there were only 4 Puritans who were allowed to come to the conference. Puritan itself was a derogatory term. And the second day, they were allowed to come in, and they had their little complaints, and James just shot them down. He had sport with them. He just shot them down one after the other. But toward the end of the second day, and this one item was not even on their agenda, they said, "Your Majesty, we feel like that a new translation should be made." And even one of James's bishops jumped in their face and said, we can't have another translation. But it's almost like epiphany settled down over James himself, because all of a sudden he saw a way to bring peace to his realm, to unite the kingdom itself, and to disperse majesty among his people. And so he set down the rules. There were 15 rules of translation. He chose the 50-some-odd men from Cambridge or Oxford. He chose them, along with the Bishop of London, Richard Bancroft, and the Secretary of State, Robert Cecil, the 3 of them, but mainly James, chose the men that were going to work on the Bible itself. And one of the things that he wanted them to do was, and he said it this way, that the language should be set forth gorgeously. And the idea there is majesty, that majesty, like when God spoke to us.
Absolutely.
God spoke to us in a love song.
Yes.
The scriptures are a lyric from the beginning to the end.
Yes.
You don't just sit down and write something like, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning." You don't just sit down and hack that out. That's something that's imparted to you.
It's divinely imparted.
John, spent 3 years with Jesus before he wrote that. But even so, the Greek has to be translated into the English. And so what James brought was that sense of divine right. He was a monarchist king, and so he wanted a monarchist Bible. But we worship a monarchist God. We worship a God who is absolute.
Yes.
And so this book, he wanted more than anything for this book to reflect that majesty.
When we come back after this break, we're going to talk more about majesty. And you set such a beautiful stage, the history, the setting, of the 17th century king. But there really is a point to this book, and I want you to talk with me more about the heart of King James when we come back after this break. So stay with me. After this break, we're going to come back with more of Babbie's House and my friend, David Teems. Stay with me. We'll be right back.
Compulsive eating affects millions of people worldwide. These are just some of the symptoms. If you feel powerless over food and unable to control the way you eat, you're not alone. Overeaters Anonymous can help. Through shared experience, strength, and hope, we provide an effective program and the support you need to stop compulsive eating. For more information about Overeaters Anonymous or to find a meeting in your area, visit our website at oa.org. Welcome to Overeaters Anonymous. Welcome home.
Hi, I'm Ben Affleck, and many actors have played the part of a U.S. serviceman in the movies. But for veterans like James Crosby and so many other brave men and women, his service and his sacrifice for our country are real.
Outside Baghdad, a rocket attack blew up my Humvee, killing one of my Marines and leaving me paralyzed.
When James returned home, he, like many others, was in no condition to cope and advocate for the services he needed. Fortunately, Paralyzed Veterans of America's trained experts were there to help him, so he could concentrate on getting well. For over 60 years, Paralyzed Veterans of America has worked to ensure that our injured veterans get the medical, housing, and auto benefits they have earned.
I'm so thankful Paralyzed Veterans of America was there for me.
Surely those who sacrificed so much deserve no less. Join me in supporting our paralyzed veterans. Visit pva.org.
Welcome back to Babbie's House. I've been talking with David Teems, the author of Majesty, the king behind the King James Bible. And you know, David, you color all of these details. You talk about King James as if he lived in your cul-de-sac. I mean, you know these the inside of his reign as well as the inside of his head, and it's beautiful. This love affair that you have for his reign, and in your book. Majesty, it's filled full of all these historical details, but I know, knowing you, that it's much more than about history. There is a bottom line and there's a main point. Mm-hmm. Tell me what that. Elaborate on that.
The thing that attracted me most about James was his humanity. By the time he became the English king, he should have just been totally insane, as some of the English kings were and queens, but he wasn't. He was kind of like Hamlet. Shakespeare's creation, Hamlet, was outrageously sane, and James was too. And you're right, I did crawl into his head because I believe that's where the story is with any biography. At the end of the day, and I hate cliches like that. I'm going to smack myself now because I actually used a cliche. But at the end of the day, it's still a story we've come to read, and that's what fascinates. You know, facts are one thing, but when a man can step right out of the pages and you can be introduced to the real guy, the guy who was flawed, like the rest of us are flawed, and that's what fascinated me. But the question you're asking is. This book, it's in the subtext. One of the things that I tried to do was I tried to be very objective. I did very, I think, very responsible scholarship. I read widely, and if you kind of develop an instinct for reading, you read one biographer you like, and you may see a name occurring more and more, so you follow that author, and then so you wind up reading well, and hopefully. I did my homework on this, but I didn't want this to come off as Christian propaganda, or I didn't want to come off as an ideologue. I wanted it to be a legitimate biography, even though I approached it differently. I approached it more from the psychological as opposed to the pure history. I mean, it's pure history, but I want to do it in way of story. But here's what I found out, that James was flawed. He was very damaged. He was orphaned. He was unloved during his childhood. I came out of my office one afternoon or late one afternoon with tears in my eyes. And Benita said, what's wrong? I said, this is crazy. I'm crying for this child that died over 400 years ago, you know, but I couldn't help myself. Yes. Because those are the things that I'm drawn to. I guess songwriting background, whatever it is about my emotional framework that attracts me to those things, I feel that's where God kind of inhabits us. Mm-hmm. And I found, and it's written,
even this flawed king. Yeah, God used this man.
Exactly, and that's what we're getting to. It's like it's not. preach. It's not a conspicuous thing in the book. You have to read it kind of in the subtext, but basically that God used this flawed man to do something that has, the King James Bible will never be, will never have that type of powerful linguistic vitality again.
I want you to read a portion of this book. You have something that you've tacked there for us.
Absolutely. I don't want us to
run out of time before we hear some of this.
Good. This is in a chapter called To the Chief Musician. It's actually a chapter on William Tyndale. But I just want to read the first few paragraphs here. It'll give you an idea of what the translators were about as they did it. It starts talking about the translators. Their commission was to render a sparkling jewel, and with an English voice. They were to transmit, not innovate. They were to submit to the original text. They did not create, they did not assume, they invented nothing. They were not authors. The role of the King James translator was more of a secretarial role. Now, what I mean by that is the King James Bible itself is not really a translation. It's kind of a patchwork. There was the previous English Bibles, the Geneva Bible, the Bishop's Bible, the Matthew's Bible, the Tyndale Bible, even the Wycliffe Bible. They were all used kind of as a template. The King James Bible, the rule was that they used the Bishop's Bible as a template, and if line by line, if it could be improved upon, then you could use the former English translations, mainly like, say, William Tyndale, for instance, who gave us 94% of the King James New Testament. They would use a line from Tyndale, and they would smooth it out. So that's how the King James Bible came about. But let me read on. Majesty was to be dispersed by means of the Scriptures. It was to be the connective tissue that held a people together. Or so was the desire of the dreamer priest king. If the Scriptures were hoarded in days past, and they were, the effort was now to open up what was sealed shut and allow all people access and at all levels of culture. The Scriptures were prepared for the poorly and non-educated, tuned to the pitch of the general listener, to the sights, as William Tyndale would say, as low as the plowboy. And this is a good part. For simplicity and majesty to come together as thoroughly as they did in the final approved text is perhaps the greater miracle of the enterprise. In aiming for this simplicity, they did not think to bring God down, but to raise the English up, and specifically as that same English submitted to the original text, suddenly God was accessible and majesty was not so distant.
Amen. David, I tell you, I believe, because of your love affair with Shakespeare, your love affair with King James.
And my love affair with God.
Amen. Your voice has come alive. Your own personal voice has come alive. Thank you for being my guest on the show today.
Thank you. It seems like we just got to
touched the
edge
surface
of it.
The name of the book is called Majesty, the King Behind the King James Bible. And thank you so very much for being my guest.
Thank you so
and
much.
God bless you, and thank you for tuning into Babbie's House as well. And stay tuned for more of Babbie's House as it comes your way. Until then, God bless you, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye for now.